better hold on tight, spider monkey.
You're incredibly fast at reading and you have such a strong vocabulary, and your bookshelf keeps expanding even though you say you're going to stop. And sometimes you speak like you're from a different time. I know what you are.
Say it.
You know, Twilight's actually a really shitty book. Well, I hope you enjoyed that intro as much as I enjoyed filming it, because I actually had a lot of fun filming that. I am an actor and I don't get the chance to, you know, flex my acting chops all that often on this channel, so it was kind of fun to get to do something silly and whatever. Okay, so let's talk about literary fiction books for the girlies who never got over Twilight. So you might be asking, Laura, what makes you so qualified to make this video? What makes you think that you, out of all people, know what the Twilight girlies want? And I'm so glad you asked, because I grew up in the peak of Twilight craze. Exhibit A, this is me at my like year 8 or 9 social, dressed up as Alice Cullen. And then Exhibit B. And yes, I am talking about fictional character Edward Cullen. Fictional man. I was very strongly Team Edward. I was always Team Vampire, Team Vamp. I'm pretty sure, I don't have a photo of it, but I'm pretty sure I had one of those like I love Edward or Team Edward Supre t-shirts somewhere. I don't have it anymore, sadly. What a relic that would be if I still had it. But I wanted to make a video that was for the girlies who never really left the vampire phase. You know, it's not a phase, mum, it's a lifestyle. So while I was researching this topic, I was actually shocked that a few of the books I picked, without actually meaning to, are sapphic romance. And I found that really interesting. I was like, oh, what is it about vampires and lesbians? Like, what is it about that? So I did a little digging, as I am wont to do with my little ADHD brain, and I came across some really interesting articles about the links between like sapphic romance, sensuality, and vampirism. Now, one of the reasons is, of course, the demonization of women's sexuality. In a piece she wrote called Dark Seductress, Amanda Hobson says that modern iterations are indicative of patterns established in Carmilla and Dracula, in which the female vampire illustrates historically specific and continuing cultural fears about women's sexuality, as well as the titillation of the sexually voracious, beautiful but deadly seductress. The image of the female vampire emphasizes cultural obsessions with manifestations of women's bodies and sexualities. So even in like the original Dracula, even though he is the titular character, a lot of the book actually, like once you meet him for the first time, focuses on the brides of Dracula and also the character whose name I've forgotten, can't remember her name, but it focuses on the brides and also the other main females characters, like how she is so impure of heart that she falls so easily into Dracula's trap. So even in a book where the main character is a male vampire, we inadvertently end up focusing a lot on the female succubus or seductresses in that book anyway. Amanda Hobson also draws parallels between like women embracing their sexuality and agency and women being diagnosed with hysteria. Normal functioning of female sexuality was defined as a disease by the medical establishments of the 18th and 19th century. As medicine and psychology developed from the male model, the cultural view of female sexuality was its oddity, its utter abnormality from this androcentric paradigm. The images of female sexuality oscillate on a dichotomous framework of frigidity and hypersexuality. Both must be cured and contained. So we kind of get back to the like original like Madonna whore complex. It's like you're either the virginal virgin or you're like the slutty slut. And a lot of these books kind of do focus on that traditional stereotypical view of a woman like being drawn into this succubus's world and finding freedom in her life and sexual agency. I also think the ties can be sort of seen when you look even further, when you're talking about like a woman's cycle. And yes, I'm very aware that not all women have cycles, but if you're talking about like the links between like the cycle of blood and like vampires' obsession of blood, and like both bring women back to this very like primal animalistic level. And I think both of those topics are considered quite, obviously one more than the other, but they are considered quite taboo to talk about. In Queerlings magazine, Jamie Zachariah wrote an essay about vampires in queer literature, and he says, "A monster who will take her life, but even more threatening, she is a deception. At first glance, she seems like your average woman, but when you look deeper, she's all wrong. Not only is she one of the undead, but equally unnatural. She's queer. She's a usurper of the patriarchy." Okay, so without further ado, let's get into some actual recommendations. The first book we're going to be talking about is called Woman Eating by Claire Coda, and this is set in a modern day London and follows our main character Lydia, who's striking out on her own in the world for the first time. Lydia is a vampire who was born human from her vampire mother and then turned as a child, but then in the lore of this world, she's still able to grow. One of the things I did actually really like and appreciate about this book is it doesn't feel the need to inundate you with the lore of its world. I'm reading a book about vampires. I'm okay with suspending a little bit of disbelief. You don't need everything to make sense. I don't feel the need all the time, unless it's a really, full-on fantasy series where there's multiple books and then you kind of want to understand what's going on. I don't need to understand the mechanics of the vampires. If it's a standalone, silly, lit fic book, I don't need to know. I'm okay with not knowing. Just tell me that her mum's a vampire and somehow she was born, and I'm okay with that. I don't need the details. So Lydia has just met the part of vampirism in her world where basically she won't grow anymore. So she has grown from a baby through child to become a young adult, but she's essentially reached her fully grown status and she's not going to outwardly age anymore. She has rented an artist studio and is starting a internship at a very prestigious art gallery, and she's basically navigating that, plus being on her own for the first time, plus trying to manage her thirst and just be a human. I really enjoyed this one compared to a lot on the list. While it still does talk about some deeper topics, it's a lot lighter than a lot of the other books on this list. It approaches vampirism with a little bit of humor, with a little bit of sprinkle of Gen Z millennial humor, which I did very much appreciate. Most of the time we get, POVs of vampires reminiscing of the life that they've led and the people that they've left behind and all that stuff. I really liked the fact that we have a character who is right on the cusp of her eternity. So she's lived a normal life up until this point, and now she's looking at she's no longer going to age. The people around her will continue to age and die around her, and she's just kind of stuck in this cycle forever. I think what I personally really loved about this novel is the fact that it's almost like a coming of age lit fic mixed with a little bit of vampire. It's talking about Lydia trying to work out where she fits into this new world and this new life, knowing that she's going to have to keep doing this over and over and over and over again. So she never gets to leave that awkward pre-adult stage of her life. Lydia is a little bit socially inept, which again, I kind of related to. She is desperate to fit in with her peers and to understand the world around her, which is obviously made much more difficult by the fact that she drinks blood. Which sort of leads me into the next part. I was going to say I really enjoyed the descriptions of food. Lydia is mixed race, so her mother is a vampire and her father is Japanese, and she so desperately wants to be able to connect with her father's the side of his heritage by eating the traditional Japanese food, but she's not able to eat any of it. I think this book has done a really fantastic job of symbolizing what it is to be an outsider and to be constantly stuck on the outside looking in. Lydia, as I mentioned, so desperately wants to be able to fit in with the peers around her and the people at her art studio, but she just can't, because it's not even because she's a vampire. She literally cannot fit in with the people around her. I think this one is a really fun read. If you're looking for something that, as I said, is a little bit lighter, a little bit less on the serious side, I think this would be a really good one, and that is Woman Eating by Claire Coda. The next one on the list is an absolute classic, and that is Interview with a Vampire by Anne Rice. This was originally written as a short story, which I didn't know, and Interview with a Vampire tells the story of Louis, who is turned into a vampire by the enigmatic Lestat. And the story is written from the perspective of Louis, literally being interviewed by an unnamed narrator simply known as the Boy. So it's literally an interview with a vampire. As I mentioned, Louis is turned by another vampire called Lestat, who is a very, very old, very kind of charismatic, enigmatic man. And Louis is kind of dragged kicking and screaming against his will into a life of vampirism. The story is told across multiple years and multiple continents. We begin in New Orleans, And eventually Louis is joined by another vampire called Claudia, who is a beautiful young girl who is turned and then trapped forever in the body of a young girl. I think she's 8 or 9 in the books. Louis and Claudia try to distance themselves from Lestat, so they leave New Orleans and run away to Europe, which is sort of where a lot of the story takes place from there. Interview with a Vampire is an absolute classic in the Hall of Fame of vampire litfic. It is deeply, deeply steeped in classic Gothic storytelling, and Anne Rice does a really beautiful job of portraying like the deep, seedy underbelly of New Orleans and the vampire world that she has created. You do get a little bit of lore in this book, which, you know, I do appreciate when it makes sense and you're not just feeling like you're being dumped on with a bunch of information. The story delves into the complexities of morality and immortality, especially with the character of Claudia, who is turned into a vampire when she's a child and doesn't age. So she is forever stuck in this kind of angelic, cherubic body, even though her mind does age. Claudia grows to have little value for human life and not a super strong grasp on what is right and wrong, probably because, as I mentioned, she was a literal child when she was turned, so she hasn't really had the chance to become a fully grown person and have a good understanding of what is right or wrong. Each of the characters is sort of like a lens through which we can examine like different moral conflicts. I especially felt for the character of Claudia because I cannot imagine being a fully grown adult in here with, you know, adult desires for intimacy and love, but being trapped in the body of a child. This book is an absolute must read on the Vampire Litfic list. It's giving very much like Carlyle's search for trying to find like a soul and understanding of mortality. If you were really drawn to that side of the story in Twilight, you will absolutely love Interview with a Vampire by Anne Rice. Next on our list, we have a newbie, which is Hungerstone by Kat Dunn. Also, the cover is just mwah, chef's kiss. This is a contemporary retelling of Camilla, which is another book we will be talking about in this video. So Hungerstone is about Lenore and Henry. They are a married couple in like, I want to say 18th century England. I probably should have checked the date before I started this video. They are an aristocratic couple leaving London to spend the summer at their newly purchased summer house. Henry is like a steel magnate from New Money. Lenore is a orphaned aristocratic late, so she comes from like a dukedom, but when her parents were killed and she was orphans, they left her with no money. So Henry and Lenore sort of band together. He can bring the money, she can bring the title, and together they are determined to conquer the aristocratic society of London. Lenore's life basically revolves around the aristocracy and keeping her husband happy, and etiquette and what is proper and right, and trying to ensure that her and Henry's place within the aristocratic society is very solidly cemented. The couple is on their way to their new estate called Nethershaw when they come across a carriage accident and a young girl who is completely on her own in the middle of the pouring rain. So they pick up this mysterious girl, take her back to their estate to recover, and that is where we meet our third main character, Camilla. They bring Camilla back to the estate to sort of recuperate, and that is where Lenore's grasp on like reality and her life as she knows it starts to unravel. This book is wonderfully paced, as is the way with, I guess, a lot of litfic. It can, like, some litfic can be very slow burn, and I can recognize and see that, but this is so wonderfully paced and just kind of like chugs along from page 1 in terms of plot, which I really liked. So if you are someone who likes their litfic with like a little bit more plot rather than just vibes, this is a really good one for you to pick up. The mystery underlying the characters of Henry and Lenore, like their mysterious backstory, is also really nicely dripped out in a way that keeps you very well fed from page 1, but at the same time, when you do get the reveal, it's not like, oh, shock, horror, twist, where did that come from? You're like, oh, that actually makes sense. And it really brings to light a lot of the reasonings for why the characters do what they do. Like, it makes perfect sense for the personalities and motivations of the characters as you know it. The underlying theme of the book, as spoken by Camilla to Lenore, is, what do you hunger for? And I think this is such a great way to encompass like the multiple facets of womanhood, and that is what this story hits on. The tension, particularly between like Lenore and Camilla, like this sapphic yearning, is just, oh, it's so good. Even when both characters are fully clothed, the way Kat Dunn writes this book just like drips with sexual tension. I loved the concept of like a woman's sexual agency and their yearning and awakening and her understanding of all that stuff is linked to this kind of strange disease that represents an insatiable hunger. The time period that this book is set in is right smack bang in the middle of the Industrial Revolution, so I also really liked the way, like, the parallels of Lenore's character as she's growing and changing with the world around her, like literally growing and changing in front of her eyes. This, if you are someone who desperately wanted Stephenie Meyer to expand on the backstory of Rosalie and how she came to be a vampire, this is the book for you. This is giving such Rosalie energy, I just can't even describe it. The next book I want to talk about is Thirst by Marina Yuskov, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, and translated by Heather Cleary. Thirst is told from the perspective of two different women from two different time periods, both of which women I'm 99.9% sure remain unnamed for the majority of the book. The first part of the book is we get the story of a vampire who's fleeing Europe to Buenos Aires after both her creator / master and all of her sisters are murdered by neighboring villagers. I think grief is something that isn't thoroughly explored in vampire books a lot. Like, we presume that these vampires are kind of like unfeeling creatures. I loved the fact that the main character really grieves for her family and her sisters that are brutally murdered in front of her. So our character escapes to Buenos Aires and is able to remain sort of unseen and undiscovered for a while due to a breakout of yellow plague in the city that she has based herself in. So kind of death and destruction is all around her anyway, and she's able to feed without really being detected until she sort of like falls in love with a local doctor, and that kind of ends up being the catalyst for her having to flee back to Argentina. I loved getting to have this woman's perspective of watching the world around her grow and change as she is stuck in this perpetual youth. Our other POV is a woman living in modern day Argentina where she's watching her mother slowly succumb to a degenerative illness. I loved this is such a, like, I would say genre bending in that you really get like contemporary lit fic, and then you also get like classic gothic storytelling. I loved how both characters are kind of forced to deal with the concept of death and loneliness and mortality in very different circumstances. Our vampire character is obviously struck by her own indestructibility. Is that a word? Indestructibility? It's a word now. And our other character is dealing with watching someone she loves so dearly slowly succumb to this horrible illness. This does have like a smallish subplot of like sapphic romance once our two characters meet, but I would say this is genuinely a book about hope and loss and the meaning that our own lives take on once the people that we love disappear from that life. I am such a sucker for like poetic gothic literature, so I think that's why this one really scratched an itch for me, especially in the first half. And it's like really quite beautiful in its simplicity, just allowing these character studies to shine against this like gothic grimy backdrop that the author creates. If you're really looking for something that's like a vampire, this is probably not the one for you. I would say that out of all of them, this is the one where it's like the least vampire-y. Like the actual vampirism does kind of take a backseat to the growth of the characters and their character study. But I guess that's like, it is kind of the case for a lot of the books. The kind of like self-martyrdom of the main character, of the main vampire character in this book, is giving just such Edward. Like, she's just so self-righteous, and that just gives such Edward Cullen energy. So this is a book recommendation for the girlies who were Team Edward. So the last book I want to talk about is Camilla by J. Sheridan Le Fanu. This is the book that started it all. Well, not started it all, but this is said to be the inspiration behind Dracula and countless other like gothic vampire books. I think this is like probably one of the first books that introduced that kind of like gothic sapphic sensuality. This tells the story of Laura. Hello. Who lives in an isolated castle with her father, who has ailing health. One day, while out doing her thing, they hear a carriage crash and they are introduced to the character of Camilla. Camilla is a bad bitch. That's Camilla is a bad bitch. She's also a little bit psycho. This book is very short, but oh boy does it pack a punch in a short amount of space. The setting is the perfect gothic grey weather castle vibes, and the mood that sets is like the perfect setting for the growing tension that happens in the book. As more young women in the sort of village near their castles succumb to this mysterious illness that's like, they call it a wasting sickness, Camilla and Laura's relationship grows stronger and stronger, with Laura kind of being drawn into Camilla's mysterious shady world. This book drips sexual tension and has no right being this horny for a book that was written in 1872. Camilla literally likes to suck blood from Laura's tit. Like, come on. But at the same time, it's also like the most achingly tender love story, and also the most batshit insane, like, good for her vibes. It's like, it's the perfect book. Like, one line from the book is, "If your dear heart is wounded, my wild heart bleeds with yours." Like, come on. I don't want it if that's not it. This book is luscious in both its writing style and its content and its sexual yearning. I would go out on a limb to say this is the bad bitch book of vampire lit fic, and you absolutely have to read this. This one is for the girlies who always thought Alice and Bella had a little something going on. This is the book for you. Which, by the by, I don't totally disagree with you on. Okay, so those are my recommendations for contemporary, well, not contemporary, but like grown-up Twilight. For the girlies who never quite got over Twilight, I'm here and with you. I see you. I appreciate you. We're in this together. But I hope you liked that video, and if you have any more recommendations for grown-up vampire books, please feel free to leave them in the comment. I'm always looking for some new ones. And as usual, don't forget to like, subscribe, don't leave a mean comment or I will cry. Have a great week, and I will see you in the next video. Mwah! Bye.